Keeper of the Lost Cities, Neverseen. Chapter 18. Sophie woke with the sunrise and found Keith still asleep by his window, his cheeks smashed up against the glass. She smiled at how peaceful he looked. No sign of any nightmares. She smiled even wider when she noticed a tiny trail of drool near his lip. "You slept on the floor?" Kella asked from the doorway. Sophie clutched her chest to calm her startled heart. It was for a good cause. She took one last look at a sleeping Keith before pulling her drapes closed. "So, how come you're up so early?" "I'm always awake at this hour. I take my 10 minutes at midday, under the warmth of the high noon sun." Sophie couldn't imagine living on so little sleep, but she was more worried about the way Calla was nervously twiddling her green thumbs. "Is everything okay?" she asked. Calla's wide gray eyes met hers. "I need help from the Moonlark. There's something I need you to check for me. A whisper in the forest I do not understand." The words felt colder than the floor as Sophie fumbled to change into pants and a tunic. She was still struggling into her boots as she followed Calla to the waterfall common room. "We should leave a note for the others so they do not wonder where you are," Calla whispered, plucking a dry leaf from the carpet and carving a message with her thumbnail. "Wait, are we leaving Louveterre?" Sophie had assumed she was referring to the trees right outside. Calla handed her the message she'd cut out in frilly lettering. "With Calla in Brackenale. Be home soon. Sophie and Bianna." "Bianna?" Sophie asked. Calla pointed to the corner. "I assume you're planning to join us." "I am," Bianna agreed, appearing in the shadows. "But how did you know I was there?" "Gnomish eyes are not fooled by tricks of light," Calla told her. "Seriously?" Bianna asked. "How did I not know that?" "It's not something we think to mention," Calla said. "Elves have no reason to hide from us." "Are we ready? The journey ahead is long." "Just let me grab my shoes," Bianna said, and Sophie was relieved to see her return from her bedroom in a pair of sturdy walking boots. Calla placed the leaf note on the table and led them down to the winding stairs. Bianna used the walk to play "How many invisible fingers am I holding up?" and Calla passed every test with flying colors. "Wow, I can't believe you can see me," Bianna said, blinking in and out of sight. "Can you teach me how you do it, so I can find a new way around it?" "I suppose we can give it a try." They'd reached the ground by then, and Calla dropped to her knees, pressing her palms against an exposed tree root. She closed her eyes, singing a deep, slow song. The language sounded earthier than gnomish, and Calla seemed to sink straight into the soil. The roots started twisting and twirling and sweeping aside the soil, creating a narrow tunnel that stretched underground. Bianna looked at Sophie, her head pleading, "You first," as Calla motioned for them to follow her underneath the earth. Sophie had to duck her head as she plodded into the dark tunnel, her eyes barely registering Calla's silhouette up ahead. Bianna stayed close, keeping one hand on Sophie's shoulder. After several minutes of stumbling in the dark, Calla told them to hold still. "You need to be secured," Calla said, coiling roots around their feet and waists. "The trees will carry us to Brackenale. All you must do is trust, and try not to scream." The not screaming part was definitely not reassuring. Neither was the way Calla hummed to make the roots squeeze even tighter. Sweat trickled down Sophie's spine, and she reached for Bianna's hand, glad Bianna's palm felt as clammy as hers. "Where is Brackenale?" Bianna whispered. "The one place I should not take you, but I must. It's in the neutral territories." Sophie couldn't decide which was scarier, knowing she was headed somewhere the Counselor Orley had specifically warned her to stay away from, or riding nature's most terrifying tree root roller coaster. Calla sang as they traveled, and the lyrics seemed to spur the roots faster until they were tearing through the earth so fast Sophie could feel her cheeks ballooning out like a cartoon character. She did not want to know what things were getting stuck in her teeth. She also had no idea where they were going. The tunnel was pitch black, and every few minutes they would stop, and Calla would tangle new roots around them to change direction. "Can you travel anywhere like this?" Sophie asked. "Within limits. Deeper parts of the earth can only be reached by ancient root systems, and the ogres uprooted all the pathways into Ravagog, unless you believe the legends." Sophie wanted to ask what the legends were, but she could feel the roots pulling them toward the surface. What are we supposed to do when we get to Brackenale? She asked. You will be serving as my eyes and ears. A friend of mine used to live here, but I received word she had fled. She said the forest felt too anxious, and I need you to find out what that means. How can a forest be anxious? Sophie asked. But Biana had a better question. Does that mean you're not coming with us? I don't think it would be wise. The whispers in the roots feel like a warning. They sing of weakness and darkness and some sort of unnatural tampering. The lump in Sophie's throat made it hard to whisper. The plague. It's possible, Kala agreed. That is why I need you. The plague only harms plant life and plant-related things. You and Biana will be able to search the forest safely. Assuming there were no ogres running around infecting the trees. Biana must have shared Sophie's worries because she leaned closer and whispered, I'm guessing you aren't carrying a melder? I wish, but I have my sucker punch and Dex's panic switch, and I can inflict, and you can turn invisible. I also brought these. Kala pressed a cool, soothing crystal into each of their palms. They'll lead you to a forest in the Forbidden Cities, should you need to make a quick getaway. I will find you there and return you to Oliveter. Sophie squeezed the crystal, trying to convince herself it would be enough. All they need is a few seconds and a beam of light, and they'd be far away from any danger. They could do this. The pep talk didn't ease her nerves nearly as much as she wanted, especially when the roots screeched to a stop. Cal hummed a new song, and the soil parted above them, letting light stream into the tunnel, burning their eyes like laser beams. The roots say to follow the sun, Cal whispered. And you don't have any idea what we're looking for? Biana asked. Kala shook her head, but I suspect you'll know it when you see it. I'll leave the tunnels open so it's easier for you to find when you return. Sophie nodded, tucking her crystal into her easiest-to-reach pocket. Biana did the same and latched into Sophie's hand, with a death grip as they climbed the slippery soil wall and emerged into the forest. The scene looked normal enough. Mossy trees, overgrown paths, an abundance of green and brown, but something felt wrong. Sophie tried to tell herself it was only her paranoia, but she still scooted closer to Biana as they shoved through the ferns and bushes. Bet you're wishing you hadn't gone up to spy on me, huh? Sophie whispered. Actually, I was already awake. Biana twisted her hair into a fancy knot to keep it from blowing in the damp wind. It's hard to sleep in a strange bed. An earth-shaking roar drowned out Sophie's reply. What was that? Sophie glanced over her shoulder, sure she'd spot some sort of hungry beast devouring them. Biana pointed up to a higher branch, where a black, parrot-sized bird watched over them with glittering eyes. Don't worry, it's just a boobry. That's seriously its name? Yep, you should hear the jokes Keith and Fitz make. The bird's head was crowned with a yellow feather mohawk, but its most distinct feature was its long, curved eyelashes. It looked like it should be doing a mascara commercial, as it batted its eyes, letting out another roar. That was when Sophie realized what was wrong with the forest. It didn't rustle, or crackle, or make any of the sounds trees normally made. Other than the roaring boobry, the whole place seemed to be holding its breath. Come on, Sophie said, checking the sky to make sure they were headed in the right direction. We shouldn't spend too much time here. They doubled their pace, chasing the sun as it curved across the horizon. Sophie tried to make a mental note of each place they rerouted, around rocks or streams or overgrown patches, but she wished she had something to mark the trail. How much farther do you think we should walk? Biana whispered, when they stopped to catch their breath. How about we count to 1,000, and if we still haven't found anything, we double back on a different path. They counted every footfall, and at step 710, they curved around into the rocky outcropping and froze. What is that? Sophie breathed, pointing ahead to a small thicket where one of the trees was shrouded under a dome of pure white light. It looks like some sort of force field, Biana whispered. Sophie grabbed a small stone and flung it at the tree. As soon as it touched the force field, white lightning flashed, and the stone ricocheted toward her head at 10 times the speed. She barely managed to duck before it streaked past, embedding into a nearby tree. I don't get it, Bianca whispered, pulling Sophie behind the rocks to hide. Why would anyone shield a tree? Sophie had a theory, but it wasn't a good one. I need to get a closer look. Bianca grabbed her wrists to stop her. Do you think it's safe? If someone's around, don't you think they would have checked after the lightning? True. Bianca reluctantly followed Sophie to the tree, glancing over her shoulder the whole time. I don't like this, she mumbled. Something feels wrong. Indeed it did, but not for the reason Bianca probably meant. Sophie was expecting the shielded tree to show some sign of the plague, but it looked perfectly healthy. In fact, its leaves were brighter green than any of the trees around it, and the bark almost had a sheen. She squatted and grabbed a handful of fallen sticks, holding them up to see if the dried leaves matched. What are you doing? Bianca asked. Trying to see if any of these are from the same tree. Though it might be better to dig up a root. That way we can bring back a sample to a Louveterre and test if the tree is infected. But if the tree is infected, you would expose Calla and Sior and Amici to the plague. Sophie dropped the stick, but she'd already touched it. Were her hands contaminated? Maybe I should leap away, and you can tell Calla to send someone else to get me. Someone with a lot of disinfectant. I don't think it's a good idea to split up, Bianca said. Is it better than putting Calla at risk? Of course, Bianca said, though she didn't look happy about it. But we could still walk back at least part of the way together. I shouldn't go more than halfway, just to be safe. They'd only taken a few steps back when a flash of light drew their attention. A black-cloaked figure appeared a few feet away, his sleeve bearing the unmistakable white eye symbol of the Neverseen.